and I love this part of my work because I just love sharing what I know. And so Hydrate Your Yard, tonight's all about earthworks. So this is where we were going to get started, and let's get rolling. All right, so tonight we're going to cover the what, where, and how. And this is important. So we're going to start with the principles because this is where we should be starting. And for those who are familiar with Brad Lancaster, he's known as the guru of water harvesting. This is how I got started. In 2007, I picked up his first book, volume 1. He's now got a second edition with all colors. And so definitely check out Brad's new books. But Brad did a really good job of breaking down water harvesting into 8 simple principles. And I like that because I too have a permaculture background, and permaculture is based on principles. And the first principle is to begin with long and thoughtful observation. That's important. This is where we should start. That's why I love this photo. This is my lovely wife, Erica. And when we got started in 2008, shaping the earth, and we planted our first apple trees, there's a peach tree there. Those trees are no longer there. It's replaced with a tangelo and a desert willow. But that observation is where we want to start. We want to start with, where does the sun come up? Where does it set throughout the year? Why is that important for water harvesting? Where does the water flow? Do you already have low spots? So we'll cover a lot more of that in the presentation, but start with long and thoughtful observation. Before you do anything, just go out and observe. Observe these different patterns that we're going to cover tonight. And then number 2 is you start at the top. You start at the top and you work your way down. Now, why would you do that? Well, gravity. Gravity is going to help that water flow down from the surfaces. Like, for example, the roof, it's going to flow down, it's going to go onto the landscape and then flow down to the lowest spot. That lowest spot should be our retention basins. So you always start at the top, let gravity do its job and get the water to where you want it. So you're planting the water for the plants. Start small and simple. I really like this principle. This is a great principle to start small and simple. Earthworks is the best way to start shaping the earth. Because if you install rain tanks that get into more of a complex system, where's that rain tank going to overflow? It's going to overflow to your earthworks because you've already did that as your first step. If you install a gray water system, where does that gray water go? Well, it's going to go to your earthworks because you've already got those created. So if you start with the earthworks, that's starting small and simple, just getting out and shaping that earth to slow, spread, and sink it, which is very important for water harvesting here in our desert climate. When we get monsoons, they're hard and fast. We want to be able to slow that water down. We want to let it time to spread out. And we want to let it just sink into the ground. And if we do that, planting that water for the plants, then that hard monsoon rains, if we get an inch or 2 inch or even more, the ground can absorb it and soak it in. So you're creating that sponge as well. But I'll tell you, if you don't plan for the overflow, Mother Nature definitely has a plan for that overflow. And it's going to be the lowest spot. That's where water wants to go, is that it's going to find the lowest spot of that berm. So as you can see in the photo, we have the water coming down. Get my laser here so that way you can. So the water's coming off the roof. There's a downspout. The water's flowing and around. This is a really good example of a berm and a basin behind it. So we got the berm and the basin. When this basin fills up, it overflows, it goes down into the next berm and basin. When that berm and basin fills up, it's going to overflow and go down into the next one. Slowing it, spreading it, sinking it, let it travel, walk throughout your landscape, but always plan for that overflow. And then the final overflow would be onto the street, but try to capture as much as you can before that. Maximize the living and organic ground cover. Mulch. Organic mulch is so important, and we have lots of it to use. So it makes sense that we, instead of using a rock mulch, when we can, use a wood chip mulch. That wood chip mulch is going to act as a sponge. It's going to help absorb water. It's going to help hold it into the soil longer, but it's also going to feed the soil. And that's what I really like about organic mulch, is it's feeding the soil. Not just like rock mulch, which is helping all the benefits of holding moisture, but it doesn't provide any food for the soil. And that's the soil critters that are going to come up and munch on that mulch. So when we plant in a mulch basin that is a happy soil, you're going to have happy plants. That little desert willow, wow, it really grew. Just giving it the right amount of water so it doesn't grow too fast, but also the right type of soil. It's going to make happy plants. I like this principle, stacking functions. I really took this one at home. This is another permaculture principle. Is how many functions does one element serve? And that's important, because when I'm putting together a design, I think about all the elements that I'm going to add to that. Trees, rain tanks, gray water, of course, earthworks, and where are they all going to go? And what are these features doing? Are they serving more than one function? So for example, if I put in a tree, think about how many functions does that one tree serve? Cleaner air. It's going to provide wildlife habitat. It's going to, of course, provide shade. That's really important. If I plant two, say maybe 15 feet apart, I can hang my hammock. So how many functions can we get out of those? Same with a rain tank. If I install a rain tank's going to hold water. That's one function, but it's vertical. It could be used as a trellis. I can site it in a certain area where it might block the wind or block the sun from hitting part of my house. So how many functions can I get out of each feature that I put into my design? Yep, and we're gonna end where we started. We gotta get back and observe. Because if we're not observing our work, how do we know it's working? So if I get out and I do all this earthwork, I shape it, I gotta go out when it rains. When it fills up with water, did it overflow where I designed it to? In this photo, you can see it's not overflowing where it should. This should fill up the basin and overflow right back out where it came in. But instead, it's overflowing the curb. So an easy fix is to berm up the downhill side and then stop that water from flowing out where it's not supposed to. Another where scenarios happen, this particular berm, it broke out. Now, why did it break out? You know, it's hard to say. It could have been the low spot on the berm wasn't intended to be the overflow, so water flow over it. But it's an easy fix. It's moving those rocks out of the way, getting that soil back, and we really want to compact our berms. When we build a berm, we want to make sure it's compacted very well, but we don't want to compact the basins. So compact your berms, but not the basins, and make them wide enough at the bottom. So a berm should be at least 3 times as wide at the bottom as it is height. If it's more sandy soil, you need to go wider. All right, so that's the 8 principles of water harvesting. So when I get through those principles, I always love to ask, where do we start? And Charlie's gonna, pop up that poll for you. Go ahead and answer. Where do we start? What's the first thing we start with in water harvesting? I'll give you a few more seconds. All right, yes, long and thoughtful observation. That is where we start. So very good. Okay, close that. There we go. Yes. So this is where we start. Begin with long and thoughtful observation. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw our site. So I know you're at home. You should have some paper and a pen. I want you to draw your site. So let's just take maybe a minute to 2 minutes, and I don't want you to get all fancy with it. I just want you to think about your site. You might have only been in your home maybe a week, I don't know, maybe several years. 1 year of long and thoughtful observation so you can see a full the seasonal patterns is always good to start with. So when you draw your site, I want you to start with the property lines. And the reason why I like to start with the property lines is because if I don't, and I start drawing the house, well, I always run out of space. So what I do is I start with the property line. Okay, so I'm going to get my rectangle. Notice I'm not drawing the scale at this point. I'm just drawing. Now, when you get ready to start committing and thinking about your true design, this is just for getting our thoughts out. you are going to want to use a scale, either an engineering or an architectural scale. You could use grid paper. Grid paper is so you can be able to, one square is say a foot. So however you're going to create that scale drawing, that's important, especially when you're getting ready to implement. But for tonight, I want you to draw your site, start with the property line, and then draw your house inside. Doesn't have to be exact, just has to be something to represent your house. Then add in all your trees. Trees are important because they're a big feature in our landscape. So we want to make sure that our trees are located on our site. Draw in those shrubs. If you have a tree that you plan on removing for some reason, or you have a space where you know you're going to put a tree, draw that in on your plan as well and mark it as such. Draw any other permanent structures, like a storage shed. Because a storage shed, you might think, oh, that's small, but 100 square foot area, 1 inch of rain is 60 gallons. So you might be able to harvest off that water, or it's definitely shedding somewhere. You should have marked the directions: north, south, east, or west. You can mark all 4, at least mark 1, so that way you can know what direction. I want you to take a note on this graphic. North is at the bottom. When you look at a Google map or a Bing map or an online map, typically north's on top, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could be any way that you see your site from bird's eye view, as long as you mark the correct direction for north. Okay? So north is on the bottom, south is on the top, west on the right, east on the left. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds to kind of wrap up your start of your drawing. But as we go through, I want you to add to it. I want you to be thinking about these different sectors, different factors that we have. So I just want to throw that in as it's a terminology. So sectors, factors, they mean the same thing. It's the wild energies that flow into our site from the outside area. So it's wild energies from outside our system and passes through it. Yeah, there's a lot on that list, and there's even more. But sun, water, wind, those are big ones, and we'll cover those tonight. But I do want to start with utilities. So utilities, this is an interesting one because utilities can really have an overall effect on your design, because you might have gas running right where you want to put a basin, electric, sewer, water. All these things could be in the area that you're wanting to dig, and we've got to be very cautious about that. So you think maybe, oh, the first call I'm going to make is to my friend, is help me start digging those earthworks. But no, your first call is to Arizona 811. So call Arizona Blue Stake. They're going to come out and mark all the public utilities up to the connection point. And that's important to know. Public utilities to the connection point. So for example, electric connection point is the electric box that's typically mounted to your house somewhere. So if it's an overhead electric line, they're going to mark something out on the street or in the alley, and they're going to say no conflict. However, you still have to look up, because you don't want to plant a big 30-foot tree underneath the power line that it's going to grow up into and have to maintain. So for above, you got to look up and make sure you plan accordingly. Now, if it's gas is going to be below ground. The gas meter is typically right up by the house. So you're going to have a yellow line marked right up to the gas meter. Orange, that's your communication. Same thing, is typically right by your house, or you're attached to the house. But where's your water meter? Yeah, it's out there by the street or sidewalk. That's the connection point for the water. It's the water meter. So that from the meter to the house, that's a private utility. Same with the sewer. The sewer connections in the big sewer pipe in the street or in the alley. And they're going to mark possibly the manhole to access that big sewer pipe. They'll mark that in green. They may do another little mark, but they're not going to mark underground, because that's a private utility. So for private utilities, for your water and your sewer, you need to know where they're at before you start digging. Sewer, I'm not too concerned if I'm going to dig and hit it while I'm digging, because typically they're going to be 2 to 5 feet deep. The water line, the same thing. It should be about 2 feet deep, might be shallower, but I don't want to plant right on top of them. I want to plant at least 2 to 10 feet on either side of a utility. So that's important. So you can get out and for the water line, you might be able to do some potholing and try to find it, gently digging, or you can call a private locator. A private locator can mark your private lines, so the water line from the meter to the house. They can mark your sewer line as well. Stacking functions, if you need a plumber to come out for any reason, ask them if they have the equipment to mark your water line and to mark your sewer line. So that way they're already there, you're paying for them to be there, stack those functions. But once you know where those lines are, mark them on your drawing. So that way you don't have to hire the private locator to locate your private utilities each time. But whenever you dig, you definitely want to call it Arizona 811. Even though you're like, yep, I know where those utilities are, it's always best to call them. Because if you hit a utility that wasn't marked by Arizona 811, then you're going to have to pay that bill. However, if you hit a utility that wasn't marked by or incorrectly marked by Arizona 811, then they get to pay the bill. So do your part, call Arizona 811 and find out where your utilities are. All right, sun. This is a huge sector that we have to deal with here in the valley. And sun, well, it's going to rise and set different places throughout the year. So yeah, I love asking the question, where does the sun rise and where does it set? And the typical answer I get is, well, it rises in the east and it sets in the west. And that's true. But how many days out of the year does that happen? Well, we're going to be coming up onto our equinox here soon in September, and then again in the spring. And so our summer and winter solstice, that's when the Earth is, since we're rotating around the sun, it's going to come up in different locations. So as you can see by the illustration, the summer solstice, that's when the sun is going to rise as far in the northeast, and it's going to set in the northwest, and it's about 78 degrees in the southern sky. Okay. So that's early morning, we're getting hit by that sun. We're going to get all day long, and at noon, it's going to be a little bit on the south side. So look at the shadow patterns there. And then when it sets, it's going to be on the northwest. Okay. So in the summertime, that north side of the house is going to get sun in the morning. It's going to get some shade in the afternoon, in noon, and then it's going to get sun again in the later afternoon. Okay. So in the wintertime, it's the complete opposite. That north side of the house doesn't get any sun because the sun is on the south side of east. So it's going to come south up, rise southeast, it sets southwest, and it's about 33 degrees in the southern sky. So those are our low shadows, or I'm sorry, long shadows and short days. So that's really important to know on the south side because of that long shadow. If I plant a big, huge pine tree on the south side of my house about 15 feet off, that pine tree is going to cast a shadow 1.5 times the height of the tree. So if I'm a 20-foot tree, that shadow is going to get cast 30 feet out. So what I don't want to do is provide too much shade on my house in the wintertime. So if I'm planting a tree on the south side of my house, especially if it's up closer to the house to provide some shade in the summertime, I want to make sure it drops its leaves in the wintertime, a true deciduous tree. So watching our shadow patterns are important because as you can see here, this was part of my permaculture project in the morning in December. So this is our winter solstice. Look at that, 9 a.m. and my backyard that we were starting to shape and create our garden beds is in complete shade. But by noon, that garden bed that has the broccoli growing there, that is in sun. And so when I sited that garden bed, I measured the block wall that's to the south, and it's about 6 foot tall. So I know that shadow is going to get casted 9 feet out at noon. So I placed that garden bed further out so it wouldn't be all in shade in the wintertime. So it's a good spot for winter garden, and it's a good spot for summer garden. So for sun, this is a tricky one for marking on your drawing because it just seems like everywhere's hot. But you want to think about the solar arcs, how maybe your existing trees already create that hug around your house. And in the areas that you don't have that hug around your house, and an arc to show that that's where you need that hug. So you can see at the north side, I have a pretty good hug right there with those trees. So those arcs are already being satisfied. I could use another tree right here. That would be a good spot for a tree. And actually, I have one there now that just grew by seed. So now in the back, notice my arcs are a little bit further out. They're not right up close to the house because this tree is going to provide enough shade in the wintertime on that southwest corner. But over here, I could use a tree, but it might be further away from my house so I don't get the shade on the house during the wintertime. So maybe a citrus tree far enough back, that would be good. If it's close, then a tree that drops its leaves, like right there, would be good for a desert willow, which is what I ended up planting. Okay. So on your drawing, note down your hot spots, note down your winter sun and your summer sun. So notice on the north side of the house is your summer sun, the west side is the winter sun. Microclimates, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the hot spots and also the cold spots. Because once you know where your microclimates are, you're going to be able to better understand when you go to plant, a plant that says full sun, partial shade. Then you're going to know you're going to want to plant that more on that east, kind of northeast side. If it says full sun, I love it, bring it on, you could plant it more on that south to west side, going north. Okay, water. This is important because every drop counts, and I'm just so waiting for us to get rain here in the valley. Very little here at our house, but gosh, I hope it's going to happen soon. And understanding what a watershed, how it works. Okay. So with a watershed, it's an area of land that drains to a common point. Okay. An area of land that drains to a common point. And we can see by the one illustration showing the different colors. So this is two areas of land that's draining to a common point. Okay. So it's actually two sub-watersheds draining to one watershed. And then over on the Arizona map, we'll notice that we have the Verde River watershed, a little bit of the Middle Gila watershed and way South Chandler, and then there's the Salt River watershed. We're pretty fortunate here in the valley. We get a lot of our water from that Salt River watershed and the Verde River watershed. Because the common point where it's draining is just a little east of here at the Horseshoe Dam. I think it's around the Horseshoe Dam in that area. And then the Central Arizona Project also comes in and starts meeting there. So, water. This magic number down here, 0.623, that's how you're gonna be able to convert into gallons for a 1-inch rain. So I want you to note that down because that's gonna come back for when we start calculating for our rooftops and figuring out how much water we can capture. Because if you take an area of your rooftop, times it by 0.623 and a coefficient, that's going to give us how many gallons in a 1 inch. Okay? You're going to mark down the flow of water on your sheet. Mark where if you have hose bibs, where are the hose bibs on your house? Because if you're not watering by rain, you're definitely going to have to be watering with a hose. And it's likely you're going to have to water with a hose to get those plants established. So it's always good to know where the hoses are, the hose bibs. Note any topography. So for example, you'll see high points. This is the high point part of the yard, another high point part of the yard. Okay. So water is going to flow to the south and water is flowing to the north. So technically my property has two sub-watersheds, but in the overall scheme, I'm in the larger Salt River watershed. 0.623, keep that one in mind because we're gonna be using that later. Okay, so how do I get that square foot area? So very seldom do I crawl up on a roof. I'll typically do all my desktop assessment using SketchUp as a program, but you can also, well, let me show you. You can see I outlined in SketchUp what looks like the roof area that I can see, and then I tap on that surface area, and SketchUp's going to tell me that that's approximately 800 square feet. and it's relatively close. So this is a good tool to use. There is some learning curve to it. Another tool that you could use is the Maricopa County's Assessor map. So the Maricopa County Assessor map, there's also, well, depending on what county you're in, there's typically assessor maps now online for the counties here in Arizona. So use it as a tool to where you can pull up your address. You're going to have tools that you can draw a square, polygons, and it's going to tell you the square foot area just like it did in SketchUp. So that's important because instead of learning a program, you could just use the assessor's map. But once we know what that square foot area is, then we can start using our calculation and determine how much water we can capture. Okay. So that was all the sectors and factors. And what you see on the screen here, this is what you would end up in the end with your drawing. So you could draw it all on one piece of paper. That might get a little confusing, as you can see in this drawing. You could use tracing paper if you're, so tracing paper, just like a CAD program, you create multiple layers. So you'll have a tracing paper for the power, all your utilities. You'll have a tracing paper for your traffic patterns. You have a tracing paper for your water and how it flows in it. Anyway, so creating those layers will be beneficial to keep it all in order. And definitely when you get ready to do it to this extent, I would draw it to scale. So as I mentioned, either an engineering or an architectural scale, or use some sort of grid paper, draw it out to scale. Use the Maricopa County's Assessor's map. You can print that out. You can also print it out with the scale reference that it has, and you can use that. But it is important to draw to scale when you get ready to closer to start and want to implement your design. All right. So that was a lot of information. We covered the principles, we covered the sectors and the factors. And now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it, is how do we start working with this water that we're going to be getting. And Charlie, there's a polling question. I want you to go ahead and pop up for me. And it's going to be, what is the cheapest storage option for large amounts of rainwater? I haven't given you the answer yet, but I want you to think about this one because the answer is coming up on the next slide. So what is the cheapest storage option for large amounts of rainwater? All right, yes, I'm seeing water harvesting basins. That is correct. That is where we want to start. And if we capture water in those basins, just gotta get my speaker. Okay, that's gonna store that water. And that's what Earthworks is all about, is storing water in the ground. And I've said it a few times, and I'll probably say it several more. It's planting the water for the plants. So you're shaping that earth to get the water to slow and spread and sink. That way, your desert native adapted plants can be a little bit more lush and enjoy that extra water that we're giving them, and you can reduce the amount of potable water, maybe to the point where it's surviving just on rainwater alone. And that's by slowing, spreading, and sinking that rainwater, using the material that you have on site. So here in our urban settings, typically we're just digging the earth that we already have there in our yard. We might already have some materials, maybe some river rock or riprap from the previous project. Let's go ahead and use that on site. But if you're doing restoration work, you might even be just taking down logs and putting them on contour to help create a berm, which will hold that water behind it. So use those resources that you have and create these type of features that are all meant to slow it, spread it, and sink it. So as you can see, there's several different features available for us to use. But the common ones, and that's what we're going to cover tonight, is it's going to be our swells, our basins, our berm basins, French drains, but don't forget about terracing. Terraces are good if you're on a slope that's going to be greater than a 3-to-1 slope. It's getting pretty steep to where you can't create an earthwork that is, it's going to hold that water back, where a terrace is going to serve that. And if you're getting into terraces that are above 2 or 3 feet, might be a good time to start getting an engineer involved, because that's holding back a lot of earth. But these common ones, for example, swells, we see them everywhere. They're in our streetscapes. where a street is going to be graded to slope in one direction. Well, typically the right-of-way is got that same slope to it. Okay, so when we have a swell, it's off of contour. So you can see by the illustration here, contour is that dotted line. But off of contour, notice it's a little higher on the top, lower on the bottom. And I don't want water to rush from one point to the other. So this is not necessarily like a wash where it's water's running and flowing down. This is taking it a cross section. It's slowly getting that water to our next feature, which is typically going to take it to a basin. So here's a photo before the rest of the rock got applied, but gosh, earthworks are really hard to see unless there's water in them. So definitely when we have photos that show that water, it helps a lot. But you can see where the water's flowing down. It's hitting this berm, and then it's flowing down the swell. Okay, so you're gonna dig, you're gonna basically like a berm and basin, you're gonna dig that earth and then you're gonna build up on the downhill side, but it's off of contour. And contour too, think of that, the topographical maps. So every line on a topographical map, one line is at the same elevation, the next is at a different elevation and so forth. So if we're slightly off contour, that's going to get water to run. Here's another photo. So we're trying to get water from back here to the basin. And in order to do that, shaping those swells, that, like I said, we don't want it to rush there. We just want it to slowly get there. We want it to absorb in the ground a little bit before it gets to its final destination. So using it as a resource. And then once it gets to the basin, this is where it's our opportunity to slow it down, and this is where it's going to spread and sink, is into our infiltration basins. And they don't have to be too deep. So typical basin depth is about 8 inches. So 6 to 8 inches is what we shoot for. They can go deeper, 10 inches, 18 inches is about as deep as you'd want to go with any vertical drop, because at that point you're running into a hazard. So in this particular photo, you'll notice the yard is relatively flat. Okay, so this is definitely a good opportunity to create basins because we got flat ground. When we're digging, we're gonna be creating soil. That soil has to go somewhere. And you might dig so much soil that your berms are getting too big, too tall, so you're taking the soil and you're mounding it up. Those mounds are berms. If you get your berms too high, aesthetically they don't look great, they're not doing too much because they're just big tall mounds, you may have to take some dirt away. But if you can try to get that dirt moved around into your yard so you don't have to haul it away, that's preferred. But you gotta kind of even that balance out, because when you start digging, that earth's gonna fluff up and you're gonna have more dirt than what you might expected. But start digging the earth and shape it to where your earthworks, you can see there's a basin. Notice the earthworks are around the drip line of the tree. Okay, whenever working with existing trees, we don't want to dig very deep to get into large roots. We got to be very cautious about that, but we also want to dig it out past the drip line of that basin or of the tree. So a tree, when you're thinking about where does that tree take up all the water, it's out by the edge of the canopy and actually up to 30% further out. So that's where we really want to sink our rainwater, if we can, is out closer to the drip line of the trees. So when you're thinking about placing your basins in your project, think about where the full-size canopy is going to be. Do I have a low spot where that drip line is going to be? If it's if you got a narrow spot and you have to go closer, that's what you do. But if you're digging and you have existing trees, just make sure that you're not cutting into roots that are bigger than your thumb, and you're going to really want to water and care for that tree after you get done doing the digging. When you shape the earth and you create those berms, you're also going to have an overflow. So do you remember principle number 4 or number 5 actually is to always plan for an overflow. So this overflow is going to drain right through here. I'll fit here. So this is what I'm doing. I'm checking that overflow. This is a laser level. A water level would work just fine, but you want to make sure that that overflow, that spillway, is going to be lower than what you don't want to flood. And that's important. That's one of your elevations that you've got to remember, that the spillway has to be lower than what you don't want to flood. Okay. The top of the berm is also typically going to be lower than what you don't want to flood. But that top of the berm to the top of your spillway, okay? Then you got spillway down to the bottom of the basin, and that's your retention area. Okay. So check your spillway, make sure that it's going to hold water back, make sure that you got retention, so a good 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 inches below that spillway for retention. And when you plant the plants, think about where you're planting the plants. The grasses can do well in bottom of the basins. Grasses in bottom of the basins are going to help take up that moisture. It's also going to help break up the soil because they're massive root systems that they have. So definitely certain plants can go in the bottom of the basins. Other plants are going to go up a little bit higher on the edge of the basins. We typically don't plant right on top of the berm. You're going to plant on one side or the other. And then if you could use wood chip mulch, definitely. That's my favorite to use because you're feeding the soil. Okay, so here's another earthwork project that we did through Watershed Management Group. This is a small house, large, long yard, but it's not much of a roof structure. So when calculating our earthworks, we want to calculate how much area is going to be draining to that landscape from our roof structures. And then we want to capture at least 1 inch, 2 inches better. So for rainstorms, you want to capture, say that 100-year flood. So 2 inches of rain in 1 hour. If you don't have enough space for that, try to capture at least 1 inch. You're trying to capture something. If you don't, if you can capture more, if you have the earth and the space to do it, even better. You'll notice shallow earthworks is what we created here. These are no deeper than 6 inches. They're pretty long because the yard was long. And the water that's going to shed to it, this particular project is going to be able to capture 2 inches of that rain. So before it overflows. So thinking of sizing your basins according to the size of roof and landscape that you're capturing that water from. This is also a good opportunity to take note of how they're shaping. So using flat shovels is really good for shaping the side of basins. Okay. Rakes are also really good. When you're shaping the side, you're gonna cut that edge in, you're gonna get it nice and smooth. You want the bottom of the basin to be flat. So a flat bottom basin is good. Okay. Here they use 2 different types of wood chip mulch. So the wood chip mulch you see on the pathway, that's just right off the arborist truck. The other mulch that you see, it's been through a composting process. This is that's the Western Organics Maricopa bulk mulch that we're using there. And that's since it's been slightly composted, it's going to be a darker gray in color, but it's also going to have some extra nutrients in it as well. So thinking of your mulch, you can use it as contrasting colors. You're going to have to replenish your wood chip mulch a little bit more often than a rock mulch. It might be 1 to 2 years, or depending on moisture. But rock mulch you also are to replenish, typically about every 5 years. This was a fun project. This was down in Tucson when I was doing my apprenticeship. What I love to share about this story is, very shallow basins. It's not a big roof capturing, and we're sinking that water throughout the landscape. But notice right up here at the rock arroyo. So we got the gutter daylighting. It's going over that rock arroyo into our earthworks. So when we were digging that swell to create the rock arroyo, we hit something hard. And we got the soil moved away from it, and yep, it was concrete. Sure enough, some homeowner years ago covered the whole front yard in dirt, about 8 inches deep. So they brought in 8 inches of fill dirt on top of that cement walkway. So we were fortunate. We had a jackhammer. We could have took that concrete out, but it was at the right depth to where we were able to rock over it and be able to just get our feature in without taking up that concrete. So my message to the story on this one is be prepared to change. Because when you start digging your earthworks, you may not be able to dig as deep as you thought you were going to. You may not be able to dig as wide as you thought you were going to. So keep that in mind when you're creating your earthworks. Okay, so this one, gosh, there's a few things that I really love showing out of these photos. One is you got that culvert style rain tank. So when you join me for rain tanks, we'll cover all about that. But that overflow is going to start flowing down, and we have a swell. Goes into small little basins, another swell, small little basin, and a swell. But it's the rocks I want to show. Notice the rock work that we have here. Okay. So I want to do a little, I'm going to draw. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a moment. Okay. So when drawing, a 3-to-1. So what is a 3-to-1? So I'm talking about slope and how angled is that slope. If it's a 3-to-1 slope, then I don't need to rock it because it's a nice gentle slope. A 4-to-1, a 5-to-1, nice gentle slopes. And if I have room to achieve that when I'm digging my basins, that's what I always strive for, because then I don't have to come in and add a whole bunch of rock. But if it's a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1, now I'm going to have to start thinking about adding rock to help stabilize that side of the berm. So okay, so here I have 3 dots, well, 4 dots actually. Okay, let me, okay, so there we go. If you can see that, that's a 3-to-1. Okay, now I'm a 2-to-1 slope. That's that red line. And now you see it's starting to get kind of steep. Now, dirt can start eroding away, might start walking through and slide down on that. So that, depending on if I got a lot of clay in my soil and it's really kind of easy and compact, and it's not a high traffic area, I may give that one a slide to where I don't need to rock it. However, I have a 1-to-1 slope. Now that's a steep slope, okay? That's definitely gonna need rock. So what you'll do is you're gonna start your rock work, you're gonna toe in your first rock. You're gonna add rock all the way up that slope to help stabilize it, okay? So the rule of thumb is if it's a 3-to-1, it doesn't need rock. Anything a 2-to-1, a 1-to-1, it should get rocked, okay? So a 4-to-1, a 5-to-1, definitely projects that have that nice gentle slope is going to be even more of an advantage. But if it all depends on your space that you have to dig. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So you see in this area, there's just, it's a small area. They didn't have much to work with, so they went steep, and that's why they added the rock. Here's an example. Now this is a street side project where we have about 10 feet in this boulevard strip to work with. So what we did is you got to keep at least a foot off the sidewalk and 18 inches off the back of the curb. And then we're going to start cutting down. So if we're digging down, let's just say 1 foot, this gets back to our 3-to-1 rule. If we're digging down 1 foot, then I'm gonna have 3 feet of a slope that I'm working with. So in a 10-foot area, I have 2 sides. That's gonna be a total of 6 feet. It's leaving me with a 4-foot space in the center. Now I also gotta take off the other 2 feet because of the offsets of the sidewalk and from where the curb is. So I'm only gonna have about 2 to maybe 3 feet in the center. But that's good, that's enough to put. So if you can get your gentle sloped edges in the space that you're working with, then that's a good thing to strive for. Now here it's a little closer. This is actually kind of getting in that 2-to-1 area. It's only about 7 feet that we have to work with. Okay. But we chose not to rock it. It's been holding up very well. This is at Premier Iglesias Methodist Church, so First Street and Grant in Phoenix. This was our Watershed Management Group's first low impact development green infrastructure project here in the Valley. And it's all supported on just rainfall through the curb cuts and the curb cores that we created there. But this is James Duracelli. He's telling us about plants and where we should plant them, if they should be in the bottom of the basin or up on the sides. And it's waiting for the rainwater coming through the curb core. It's going into that basin. We've got some rock work to help hold that, stabilize as it's coming through. This is at the Mesa Urban Garden. At the Mesa Urban Garden, this definitely, if you get a chance to get out in Mesa, you can visit the garden as well, but take a look at the green infrastructure low impact development project that we did there. This is, we got curb cuts into a basin. So the curb hasn't been cut yet, okay? But this is an important feature. You can see where my pointer's at there. That soil that we have separating the next berm, the next basin, is allowing us to use a wood chip mulch. Now, if this soil wasn't there and this basin was connected to the next basin, I would have to use a rock mulch, because a wood chip mulch, as the stormwater flows into the one basin, that mulch will rise up and then float out the next curb cut. So if you have an inflow and an outflow downstream, then a rock mulch is likely going to be what you'll need to use. But if your inflow is the same as the overflow, then you can use a wood chip mulch, because it's going to float up, it's going to jetty around a little bit, and then when it stops raining, it just settles right back down in place. So here it is with the curbs cut and the plants in the ground. And notice we have the riprap rock work. We learned a few things from the Premier Iglesias. We created sediment traps, so that way it captures that sediment in the rock work before it gets into the basin. That helps with maintenance. But then planting, planting grasses next to rocks, that always helps soften it up. This beautiful desert willow planted here, it's also on the south side of the garden, so it's going to help allow sunlight to warm up the garden. So thinking about plant placements, this is a cacti. It's up high onto the, it's not in the basin, it's up on high. Okay, so berms. This is what you do with all that soil that you're digging. When you have slope, when you create that berm, it creates a basin behind it. So that's an advantage to where you're digging your basin, you're taking that dirt, you're creating the berm, and it's all about holding that water back, allowing it to slow down, spread, and sink. Okay? So there's our basin. So with water in it. Okay. This is what it was when we got ready to start the project. Lots of resources. So when you're looking at your site, look what you have for resources. Do you have river rock already that you're going to take up, reuse it? Riprap is also a good. Riprap's that angler-shaped rock. It's not round like a river rock. It's going to be more angler-shaped. So we removed all the rock, and when we did, we found this pipe underneath that rock. And that pipe was connected to a drain in the patio. So the original design was the water sheds off the roof into the patio, into a drain that took it right to the street. So Low it, spread it, and sink it. That's our principle. And this was not achieving that. So by taking that rock up, that's a resource. Digging, creating those berm and basins, and then resetting that rock into a beautiful aesthetic arroyo. It's all about slowing it down, holding that water. When it overflows, it goes to the next feature and down. Slow it, spread it, sink it. And berms, this is another stacking function. So pathways. When you're creating a berm, it's a raised part of the landscape. So it could become a pathway. You might have a sidewalk that you can't change, and that is your berm. So working within your berms as a walkway to stack those functions, getting from one location to the next through a shaded, beautiful area that you planted out. With this photo here showing the water's passively flowing off the house. It's going into this basin area, and then it's running down a swell. So it's getting caught behind that berm and basin. A swell is conveying it around. Then we get into another little low basin and then conveys around again. Slow it, spread it, sink it. And now this is a really good example of an opportunity that was just missed when they took the advantage of the turf removal rebate. So some cities here in the valley do offer a turf removal rebate. And if you do take advantage of that, consider it as your rainwater earthworks rebate as well. Because if you're digging out and taking that grass out, this is the time you should be shaping your yard. Because they did a beautiful job. They planted the ocotillo and those other desert shrubs, but there's no shape to the land. So when it rains, water's just gonna run off the roof, over the landscape, and right to the street. Plus we're missing this, this is a double wide, this is 18 feet here for the driveway. So we're gonna miss all that water too. So when thinking about adding gutters, this is when I start to, okay, if I add gutters, then I'm gonna be able to capture that water that would normally fall on the driveway. That's a bonus. But for this area here, it just passively flows right into the yard. So I wouldn't have to add a gutter to that. So in this instance, by adding a gutter on this side and a downspout, that's going to convey that water to the front yard where we have the larger part of the landscape to work with to sink that water. So when thinking about, do I need gutters or do I not need gutters? If the water can just passively flow into your earthworks without gutters, I wouldn't install them. If you need to get that water to a certain location, or you're trying to get it so it doesn't fall onto a hardscape, that's when gutters start to come in play. If you're going to install a rain tank, gutters are definitely going to be needed. So in this instance, raking back that rock, shaping the earth, the ocotillo stayed in place and worked around it. Digging that out, creating a berm with a basin. So you notice it wasn't very much sloped. You can see that slope to the land here in this photo. So it's just a slight slope to work with, but enough to create a berm and basin. And then when it rains, that water flows down the downspout, down the rock arroyo into that basin that's held behind the berm. Yeah, if you don't know it by now, I love organic mulch. And if I could use it on all my projects, I would, but we don't always have that luxury. So if you're in an HOA, you may not be able to use organic mulch. But if you're just doing your landscape, think about maybe putting a compost layer or some organic mulch underneath that rock mulch. It's just going to help your soil. But a rock mulch is good. A rock mulch will help hold moisture in the soil. A rock mulch won't float away like a wood chip mulch will. Well, it depends on your flow. And in a high velocity, rocks will start to move. In a low velocity, so think of your yard. Is your water just gently flowing over your landscape? Then a rock mulch, it would be good, but you might be able to use a wood chip mulch and it will stay in place. Now, if you got more velocity that's moving that water through, a wood chip mulch is not likely going to be your choice. A rock mulch would. But if we could use wood chip mulch, it definitely is a bonus for the plants and us. And the reason why I say us, I have a smile on my face because wood chips are so much lighter than rock mulch. That's a good bonus behind it too, is when you're shoveling that rock mulch, whew, it gets old, but shoveling wood chip mulch, it's a lot lighter. So there's that advantage of it too. All right, so French drains. So the interesting thing about French drains, this is my first water harvesting project. In 2005, my wife, Erica, she came home, she was all jazzed up about this water conservation class she took through the city of Scottsdale. And the instructor that night, Joe Miller, she kept mentioning these terms about permaculture, water harvesting. And she had a green book, and that green book was full of information, and the illustrations that you see here are from that book. And Erica said, Ryan, we're gonna make a water level and we're gonna install a French drain to fix that problem we got in the front yard where the water comes off our roof, it goes off the sidewalk and then comes back. So what we wanted to do was create a French drain, very similar to what you see in this illustration here. And that's what we did. And then we put our flagstone over it, and it's our patio. So the French drain helps soak that water in, and it's there for our tree. And I share that story with you because that's the last French drain that I ever installed, my first and last. Not because it's a bad feature, it's a good feature, especially in the right scenario. It just, one, if I'm digging a basin, I can see it. If I see it filling up full of sediment, I can see that. With the French drain, I'm gonna dig a trench, and it's gonna be, a good foot wide, a foot deep, maybe a little wider, maybe a little deeper. I'm gonna put down fabric. This is that landscape fabric that for weed suppressing, it's still moisture can get through it. So it's not like plastic, so it is permeable. You're gonna lay that down in the trench, and then you're gonna use a material that's not decomposed granite. Never use decomposed granite in any of your French drains or dry wells. What happens is that decomposed granite is still decomposing, and you'll get sediment, and it'll start, the percolation won't be as good over time. What you want to use is an angular rock, a rock that's not a decomposed granite that looks like a rock, but it's a solid chunk of rock. And you'll see from the photo in various sizes, so from 1 inch, 2 to 3 inches. But you're going to fill that material into the cloth, and you're going to wrap that cloth over it, and it's the rock burrito. So yes, you're making a rock burrito into a French drain, and then you're going to cover it with some more rock. When the water runs off the landscape, it's going to hit that feature and then soak in. You can also get it to move water away. So it's going to soak in, and then it could go into a pipe and move it further out past your house as well. Okay, sizing earthworks and their capacity. So you can see on the screen, there's different options. Stormwater retention, that's the one we're going to cover tonight. Percolation rate method, we're going to cover that when we do gray water. And plant needs, I don't necessarily cover that, so I'm just going to mention it real quick. So on that plant need, if you can imagine, I have an area of land, and let's say my plant is let's use something that's going to require a little bit more water. Let's say it's a pomegranate tree. That pomegranate is going to require about 1,500 gallons a year to keep it, producing good fruit and surviving. So how much area of land do I have that I can shape based on my annual rainfall to drain to a basin by that tree? Okay, so that's plant needs. Now, for stormwater retention, just like calculating for the big retention basins, we're going to do the same for our small retention basins. We're going to use this. Oh, yeah. Did you have a chance to download this? And it should have been emailed to you when in your reminder, I think is when you got this. But this is your activity sheet. So on the activity sheet, on the back side, there's this information. It's all the runoff coefficients. Okay. And so when you're filling out this activity sheet, this information is going to depend on what type of roof that you have. So for example, if it's an asphalt roof, then you're going to use a 0.9. If it's a metal roof, I'd use a 0.95. I still wouldn't use 100. But look at it, it's for the grass or lawn. So if you're looking at water running off a landscape, look how low that coefficient is, because that surface is really soaking up that water. Okay. So if you So many there. So this is your formula. Catchment area times rainfall depth times 6.23 runoff coefficient. Okay. So we're going to do some math here real quick. So we have 800 square feet. Okay. So 800 square feet. And why am I using 800 square feet? Because if you remember when I outlined my roof structure in SketchUp and I clicked on that surface, it told me it was 800 square feet. So that's why I use that program. But if you measure out, you're going to measure length times the width, and that's going to give you your square foot of that area. Your roof structures might be a little bit, you know, all sorts of different shapes. Try to get a good estimate of your square foot area. Okay. But now I got 800, so I'm going to take 800, and that's my 800 square feet. I'm going to times that by my rainfall depth. Now, I always times by 1, because if I times by 1, which is 1 inch, then if you want to know, oh, it was a ½ inch rainstorm, how much water am I collecting? Then you just take your base number and you times it by 0.5. If you have 6 inches of rain in a year, you take your base number and you times it by 6. Okay. So 800 times 0.623. And then the runoff coefficient, it's an asphalt roof, so that's a 0.9. And, okay, so who's doing the math out there? All right, so what do we got? We have 800. Just imagine all of you are doing this with me. So 800 times 0.623 times 0.9 equals 448. Round that up to 450. That's a good number. Okay, so 450 gallons in a 1 inch event. So I have 450 gallons. So 450 gallons in a 1 inch event. Now, knowing that number, as I mentioned, I can take that number, times it by 0.5, I can times it by 6, whatever I need to get. So you'll notice that on your activity sheet. So when you're filling out your activity sheet, I highly recommend that you start with 1 inch, and then you can just use that math from there to fill out the rest of the blanks. Okay. So now we know we got 450 gallons of water that we're trying to capture. But I mentioned we should try capturing a 2 inch rain event. So that's going to be close to 900 gallons of water. Well, how big of earthworks do I need in order to capture 900 square feet or 900 gallons of water? Well, so you can see the black line, kind of the 8 figure. It's because normally we don't draw our basins as rectangles. We normally give them some shape to them. So when you're trying to figure out, gosh, what is the square foot area of this? You're going to do an estimate. And so that's why I take in that shape and then I put a rectangle on it, okay? That rectangle, let's just say it's 20 foot long. So 20 foot by 10 foot. So 20 times 10 is 200. And let's say it's an average depth of 6 inches. Okay, so I'm going to take that 200, I'm going to times it by 0.5. That gives me 100. And now I'm going to convert it into gallons. So I'm going to take that 100 and I'm going to times it by 7.48, because 7.48 gallons is what fits in a cubic foot. So how much is that 20 by 10 foot, 6 inches deep basin going to hold? It's going to hold about 748 gallons. So 750 gallons, I'm a little less on my 2 inch flow. So can I go deeper? Can I go a little bit wider? Can I create more basins. So once you get a good area or a good idea of the area that you have to work with your basins, get a shape that you want to use, get your length, your width, and your average depth, and then times that by 7.48. Okay, and that's just your quick estimate. As you can see by the calculating basins, you can definitely get more of a ballpark, and you can really get down to more accuracy by using a CAD program. But for what we're doing, definitely that quick estimate is going to give you a good idea of how much water that you're going to be able to capture. All right, so locating those earthworks. Do we just drop earthworks anywhere in the landscape? No, we really have to be cautious. We have to be cautious about where the utility lines are. The utility lines, can we stay at least 2 feet away? Hopefully, yes. 10 feet's even better. Okay, so where I would sink water, where the lowest part of my basin, I want to make sure is going to be at least 10 feet away from any structural foundation. Okay. This is kind of hard because in a lot of our urban settings, we have those little narrow landscapes. Those narrow landscapes might only be 14 feet between me and my neighbor. So that's not a good place to be sinking a lot of water. What I want to do is create a shallow swell to convey that water to a part of my yard that has a larger area where I can sink it into a basin. So if you have a narrow area, think about a shallow swell to get that water to move. You might even have to use a gutter and then a pipe and pipe that water to where you can utilize it if it's so narrow. Okay. So if your rainwater is not being utilized in the space because of where it's at, think about how you can get it to a space that you can utilize that water. But try to keep it the deepest part of those earthworks at least 10 feet away from your foundations. And then definitely pathways, use them as your, use them as a path, use those verbs with pathways, stacking those functions. And this is where I was mentioning those 3 elevations. And it's really important to remember them because that first one, it's your overflow spillway. So that's your elevation, okay? Then number 2 is that spillway is that the low enough that nothing's gonna flood. And number 3, if you didn't have number 3, then all that work that you put in was for nothing. So we want to make sure we got some retention. So that's from the top of the spillway down to the bottom of the basin. Okay, that's your retention. Now those numbers could be anything that you have to work with. For example, at our house, I only have 2 inches from the designed overflow. This is where the curb, or I should say the sidewalk and my driveway meet. That's 2 inches lower than the area that I don't want to flood. So no matter what I do in my landscape, I know that's my lowest spot. So I got to make sure that that is still accessible and open. So I can get the earth shaped and move that water, but I still have my overflow open and accessible. So how do I know? How do I know I have the right level on my overflow? Well, this is a very simple tool. And for about $30, you can make your own water level. Wow, Brad Lancaster has an excellent video on how to make your own bunyip, so that's well worth watching. And plus you get to go out with a friend to be able to get your level. So you're gonna have one person on one end of the stick and one person on the other end of the stick. And if you can imagine, you have, well gosh, you could start with a stick that they don't even have to be the same height, but you're gonna measure from the bottom of the stick up to 36 inches. You're gonna draw a line and you're gonna mark that 0. And you're gonna do the same on your next one. You're gonna start from the bottom of the stick and you're gonna mark the line 0 at 36 inches. And then you're gonna start marking them 1 inch and 1/2 inch all the way down. Okay. So if you make your bunyip that way, starting at 0 and working your way down, then the highest stick will have the highest number. And that's important because if you started with 36 inches and then labeled down to 0 at the bottom, then the lowest number is your highest stick. And that I don't know, that messes with my mind. So when you make your bunyip, start with 0 at the top and going down. And when you use your bunyip, 30 foot, it's going to be probably plenty of length. When I created mine, I thought, well, I'll have a 20-foot in between the sticks. And so I over-engineered it. I put in elbows. Trust me, you don't need any of that. You just need a solid tube that's about 5/8 in diameter and about 30 foot long. And then 2 sticks that you can zip tie or wire or tape those tubes along onto the stick. Then when you fill it full of water, you got to make sure that you get all the air bubbles out and there's no kinks, because that's how it can throw off the calibration on this high-tech tool. So make sure there's no air bubbles, no kinks, and then to make sure that it's calibrated, you're going to put the sticks at the same point, at the same level, and then the water will find level in that tube, and you should have the same marking or same region on both sticks. Okay. All right. So bunyip definitely is a good tool to have. A laser level is nice, but a lot more expensive than a water level. Other tools. Yeah, these are all you really need to get started with Earthworks. A friend told me once, all you need is a spoon. Just go out and just start digging. Well, that seems a little small to me. So a pickaxe, where you see that's going to be really good for breaking up those hard, maybe you got some hard pan, some caliche, but rakes are really good for shaping your basins. And don't forget, you have 2 sides to that rake. So you got your finger part, and then you have the smooth side. So use both of those. Flat shovels are really good for shaping in basins. And the pointed shovels, they are meant for digging. So if you're digging a hole, a pointed shovel. But if you're doing anything else with that dirt, you're likely going to be doing it with a flat shovel. If you're transferring soil from the ground to a wheelbarrow, if you're transferring soil from one point to another, a flat shovel is going to be your best tool. The reason why I say that is, imagine a pointed shovel has a little bit of curve to it. So if you're trying to shape a basin by using a flat shovel, you're going to get these little curves to the side of your basin. So the right tools could be an excavator, a large piece of equipment, depending on the size of yard that you have to work with. But starting small and simple is always a good approach. Planting native plants. And you're going to hear a lot more of this next week with Kaylee. So, but I just want you to keep in mind that planting our native and adapted plants is really a key behind water harvesting. Because if we plant the water for the plants, and those plants can survive on a rainwater and a little bit more supplemental water that we were providing them from the roof, from the landscape runoff, they're going to be nice, healthy plants that are going to last for years with very minimal supplemental water. And that's important because then we get into water conservation. So think of rainwater and native and adapted plants. Absolutely, there's cautions. There's always got to be things that we just keep in the back of our mind, make sure that we're not doing when we're creating our earthworks. Like, I don't want to create flooding. I want to solve flooding problems. I don't want to create flooding problems. So make sure that your overflow is going to be at a level that it doesn't create anything back flooding. Okay. Ponding, 12 hours is our goal. If we can get it to sink in the ground in 12 hours, that's a great goal to have. 24 hours, 32 hours and beyond that is well, we're just asking for troubles. So if we do have a ponding problem, think about how to break up that hard pan or that caliche layer that's causing that poor percolation. Putting in plants, planting grasses, as I mentioned, is going to help. Or don't dig your basins too deep, dig them wider and shallow. Mosquitoes, as I mentioned, we definitely don't want any standing water. And that structural and utilities, as I mentioned, try to keep at least 10 feet away from the foundations, 2 to 10 feet from the utilities. Walkability and bikeability. This is really important. You don't want to create earthworks in an area that you're changing and making it more complicated for someone to walk from one area to another, ride their bike. So think of the traffic patterns when you're creating your earthworks. And definitely that general safety, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to have an 18-inch vertical drop. Anything more than that, well, it could be a hazard. So if you have the space, create those nice gentle slopes, rock the sides of the basins. Maintenance. So definitely not maintenance free, but it is low maintenance. And that's one thing nice about our earthworks is as we're out observing and enjoying our beautiful landscape that we've created by planting the water for the plants, We're going to check to make sure that the plants are doing good. We're going to make sure that the overflow is working. Is the water standing longer than it should after a big storm? Do I have sediment? Am I losing capacity? Do I need more mulch? And the answer to that is probably yes, because after a year or two, you're going to see that mulch starting to deplete. So you might have to add some more mulch. And then take those and adjust. So if you did it perfect, that's great. Go out and replicate it. But if you found that you didn't quite get something right, tweak it, change it, make it right. If a plant that you put in one spot, if it dies and you love that plant and you want to try it again, try it again. But if it dies the second time, you really need to think about, is it the right plant for that place? Is there something that's going on in the soil that's not right? So do your due diligence and figure out what's happening with that plant. And then soil improvements. As I mentioned, is it drainage, adding more nutrients? Healthy soil is going to make healthy plants. All right. Whew, that was a lot of information. And we got about, about 10 minutes or so left for questions. And Charlie, is there any questions that came through the chat?
We have one question that came through the chat. That question is, I have Texas sage, and when I look at other gardens that use Texas sage, they use DG around the sage. Should I instead be using wood chips?
So you have a Texas sage, and you commonly see decomposed granite or a crushed gravel underneath a Texas sage, and you're wondering if you could use a wood chip mulch. You most certainly could use a wood chip mulch. The Texas sage, they're going to be happy with that wood chip mulch as they're happy with the rock mulch, but it's not necessarily the plant. You're covering the soil. And that's really what we want to do. We want to cover the soil. Because if we cover the soil, if you can imagine, let's start with a tree. So we're beyond the Texas sage, but the sage is doing the same. But imagine a tree. That tree, when it rains, that tree is capturing that water in the canopy and it's slowing it down. It's diffusing it. And then when those water droplets hit the soil, that's still an impact. Now, if we didn't have mulch, that will start to cause erosion. If we didn't have the tree to help slow it down, or that shrub, it's going to cause erosion. So by adding a mulch layer, either rock or wood chip, you're helping to, when that water droplet hits, it's going to diffuse that. And you won't have an erosion problem as you will if you just have bare soil. Bare soil is going to start to basically erode away and become other issues. So to answer that question, yes, most certainly you could use wood chip mulch. I would avoid putting any mulch right up to the base of the plant. So this is something I see very common after a landscaping project gets done, is rock mulch or wood chip mulch is brought all the way up to the base of the plant. So what you want to do is, if it's a 1 gallon pot, you only want to bring that mulch up to the root ball. You don't want to cover the root ball. A few things going on there is, if you cover the root ball, that root ball it wants to breathe. And so if we put too much mulch or soil on top of that root ball, it won't be able to breathe as much. And we don't want mulch to get close to the trunk of a tree, because if it gets close to the trunk of the tree, it's going to cause moisture, and that could be a problem for the tree in the long run. So rule of thumb there is, you keep the mulch out to where the original root ball of the plant is, or if you could just say, keep it 6 inches away from the trunk of the tree or from a base of a plant. Great question.
And Ryan, we just had another question come through the chat. And just for anyone that is searching for the chat or not sure how to use it, it should be, when you move your mouse around, you should see a chat button or a little icon that says chat that you can click on, and that will pop up, and you can send a message to everyone in the group, or you can send a message to me privately. I'm the WMG staff. But the other question that came up is, doesn't bark mulch consume nitrogen for the soil?
Oh, yeah, thank you for asking that question. Does bark mulch consume the nitrogen in the soil? Absolutely. Fresh bark mulch, if you dig it into the soil, that's going to lock in nitrogen from that soil. So nitrogen's in the soil, and wood chip mulch is full of carbon. So when you mix those two together, the carbon and the nitrogen is going to, well, the nitrogen is going to get depleted out of the soil. So I would never take a fresh wood chip and amend it into soil. Now, if I lay that wood chip on top of the soil, there's going to be a little bit of nitrogen depletion. That's also where you get a weed barrier, which is good. So if you're mulching, I like to mulch 3 to 4 inches with wood chip mulch. If it's fresh, and for example, if I just put down a whole bunch of seeds in October, we're waiting for those, for the spring, they'll all pop up. And then I put down a fresh layer of wood chip mulch, it's likely that those seeds won't survive because that wood chip mulch is, handling and suppressing those weeds. Now, as that wood chip mulch starts to age, then it's not going to have as much problem. So the answer to that question is wood chip mulch, I would never dig it into the soil. I would use a compost type of material to amend the soil, but always adding mulch on top. And you won't have that nitrogen depletion as if you were mixing it into the soil. But you are going to get those weed suppression benefit from it as well.
And so we don't have any other questions in the chat. If someone feels more comfortable asking a question by verbally, we might have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes for questions. And right now, everyone's able to unmute themselves. Maybe we can, does anyone want to ask anything verbally, or we still have the chat feature? Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes.
You're thinking about those questions, I'm going to talk a little bit more about mulch. So the other question I typically get is, well, isn't mulch going to, wood chip mulch going to attract termites? So the thing with termites, it's all about moisture content. And moisture, if it's just right, those termites are going to be able to use that as a traffic pattern. So what we want to make sure is that we eliminate the right type of moisture content that they like, so that way they don't have a highway right to the house. So for any type of mulch, they say that you're to keep that mulch 18 inches away from your foundation of the house. Now, I don't see too many people doing that, and I think it would look kind of funny as your mulch, rock or wood chip stops 18 inches from the house. So what's recommended is that you start to thin it down as it goes to the house. So you're going to be 4 inches, 3 or 4 inches out in the landscape, and then as you get closer to the house, go thinner. And what you're doing is you're going to decrease the amount of moisture content that you're holding next to the foundation of the house. And the studies that showed that the pea gravel basically holds the moisture the best. And so the pea gravel is the worst thing to put around the foundation of your house. So the message on that is wood chip is not going to cause termites to just run to your house. It's the moisture content that they're looking for.
Great, we don't have any other questions coming in, so I want to take a little bit of time to wrap this up. And thank you, Ryan, for your presentation. And thank you for answering those questions at the end.
Very welcome, Charlie. I just want to mention that if you do think of any questions, there's my contact information. Feel free to drop me an email, give me a call, and then also Watershed Management Group's information there. That's what, sometimes I don't always think about the questions until afterwards. So our information's there. Please reach out if you have any.
And one more thank you to the sponsors, Phoenix Smart Water, EPCOR, Salt River Project, and Central Arizona Project. We have the next Hydrate class, Hydrate Your Plants, is next Wednesday at 5:30. It's going to be a great class. We're very excited for it. If you haven't registered, register, share it with your friends. These classes are fantastic and they're free, which is great combination. Also, remember to check out the Watershed Management Group events calendar. We have these Hydrate classes as well as upcoming field studies classes if you want to learn about specifics about other topics like gray water installation or soil health. And also we have special events coming up, our Monsoon Film Festival and also our virtual Homescape Harvest Tour. All of our events are virtual right now, so anyone can join. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.